Liam. It's my great pleasure to introduce Liam Templeton, a Doonhamer. Liam works for Amphibian and Reptile Conservation as the Species on the Edge Project Officer for the Solway. Liam studied zoology at Glasgow University, completing a master's degree in environmental communication at its Crichton campus. And since then, Liam has been involved in various socially engaged projects exploring issues such as cultural democracy, food insecurity, and transport inequality. Liam, come on up.
Good morning. It's my great pleasure to be here. So I'm going to talk to you about Species on the Edge. It's a national consortium of 8 conservation organisations. Myself, I'm employed by Amphibian Reptile Conservation. We're working in partnership with 6 other charities, including the RSPB, Bug Life, Butterfly Conservation, Plant Life, Bumblebee Conservation Trust, and Bat Conservation Trust, all of whom are led by Nature Scot, as Scotland's nature agency, and all of whom are dedicated to conserving the fate, or securing the fates rather, of 37 of the rarest and most threatened species associated with Scotland's coastal and island habitats. And why coastal and island habitats? Well, through the development phase of this project, it was reflected in the data that while Scotland's coasts and islands represent some of the most intricate and fragile ecosystems in the country, exhibiting unique habitats like salt marsh, sand dunes, mackerel, as well as dramatic rocky coasts and sea cliffs, they appear to receive relatively little funding to support conservation projects, so it seemed a matter of great urgency and importance that we deliver this project in the way that we are. And so to give you a little bit of an oversight of the project structure, some of this might appear quite familiar to those of you who were aware of the Back from the Brink project that was delivered in England recently, and also due to launch this year, Nature Ambith in Wales, 2 similarly constituted partnership projects. As I mentioned, it's a consortium of 8 conservation organisations. We're operating in 7 different project areas throughout Scotland. So the Solway coast, obviously, Argyll and Inner Hebrides, the Outer Hebrides, Orkney and Shetland, Scotland's north coast and east coast. There are, and in each of those project areas, one of the partners is assuming a role of leadership. So in the Solway, myself, as part of Amphibian and Reptile Conservation, are leading in that project area. There are 9 species projects, each of which have been devised by the respective organisation covering that taxa, but are being delivered in situ by the respective organisations leading in that area. So there's a lot of opportunity for exchanging of skills, knowledge and resources, which is perceived to be one of the main outputs of the project. So within those 9 species projects, there are 37 species in total, and it's being delivered over a 4-year time frame. So I'm just going to give you an idea of those 9 species projects. Half a dozen or so have active project activity in the Scottish Solway coast. The first of which I'll speak about is called Coastal Treasures of the Eastern Solway, mainly concerning the natterjack toad. So the natterjack is Scotland's rarest amphibian. In fact, in Scotland, it only occurs in a handful of sites on the Solway coast. It's also Europe's loudest amphibian. So the males are known to, calling males can be apparently heard from up to a mile away, I believe. I've tried to include a sound clip in this slide, but I'm not sure if I'm able to click it from my button here. Perhaps not. Anyway, but so loud in fact that some residents on the Solway in communities like Firth, oh, there we go. Can we hear that? Yeah, faintly. So that gives you an idea of their sort of very iconic rasping call. And in large enough numbers, you can imagine that it creates quite a cacophony, such that residents of some communities have recalled that in their glory days, the volume was such that it would keep you up at night, or it would feel like living in a tropical jungle or on a Grecian island somewhere. It brought a sense of the exotic to the Scottish Solway coast. So that's an ambition of ours to restore that and to sort of emphasize the cultural association of that phenomenon. So the natterjack toad is a species that I would describe as a species on the edge in more ways than one. Unfortunately, they are more or less on the edge of extinction. In the Scottish Solway also, they're on the edge of their geographic range, and they're what we refer to as a pioneer species, preferring to breed in ephemeral waters, which is waters that dry up in late summer or are inundated by tidal water in winter, and preferring also early successional, what we refer to as dynamic habitat. So habitat, when it becomes quite fixed through use, no longer is quite useful to them. And so you can imagine the strategy, it's very susceptible to processes of environmental change like sea level rise or periods of drought like what was experienced earlier this year. And yeah, as I mentioned, they were once known to be quite locally abundant on the Solway, but unfortunately in recent decades have suffered dramatic declines due to things like habitat loss and also natural processes that I mentioned. So throughout this project, our aim is to work with landowners and local communities to try and restore that habitat and monitor populations, engaging communities and empowering them to participate in those kind of monitoring and practical conservation activities. The next project, led by the RSPB, is Turning the Tide. So this project probably wins the prize for the best pun in the title. So we're looking at species such as the common tern, Arctic tern, and sandwich tern, all of which are known to nest on the shores of Loch Ryan. So perhaps not strictly the Solway coast, but still in that geographic area. It's believed that they're negatively affected by the wash created by the ferry traffic coming out of Loch Ryan, but also these species are especially sensitive to disturbance from activity like dog walking, such that if a breeding colony is disturbed sufficiently during breeding season, there is a risk that the nesting individuals will abandon that colony not to return, so can have quite devastating consequences for what's seemingly quite just a mindless infraction on behalf of the dog owner. So really trying to communicate to residents and people who use these areas recreationally how to behave responsibly, so as to not affect the wildlife. There's also plans to build and deploy a raft for the birds to nest on, to act as a sort of refuge for those offshore. Also led by the RSPB is Farming Horizons, looking at species such as the red-billed chough, the Greenland white-fronted goose, and farmland wading birds like the lapwing and curlew. Generally, these species have been observed to be declining in populations broadly, again, due to changes in land use resulting in loss of habitat. The red-billed chough, particularly on the Scottish Solway, I don't think has been recorded since 2008, but there's known to be quite high numbers on the Isle of Man. So the hope is that if we're to improve the habitat sufficiently on the Scottish Solway, that we can encourage individuals to come back and re-establish a population there. Perhaps also we're exploring the use of nest boxes to try and encourage them that way as well. With the Greenland white-fronted goose, there's 2 overwintering populations in Dumfries and Galloway. The one that we're concerned with is at West Frew, which I believe has declined as much as 70% in recent years. So again, we're aiming to engage with landowners to work in collaboration with them to devise of and prescribe land management plans for the benefit of the wildlife. In partnership with butterfly conservation, we're also working to conserve the northern brown argus, which is a butterfly of the blue family. They've been observed to decline as much as 46% since the mid-90s, and they've suffered from effects of habitat fragmentation and the loss of species-rich grasslands as a result of agricultural intensification or abandonment or inappropriate forestry plantation. So the plan with this species is to, again, empower local communities and volunteers to participate in surveying and monitoring of known colonies to reassess their condition, and also to restore habitats through practical conservation management, such as removing scrub with the help of volunteer work parties. And collaboration with the Bat Conservation Trust, Island Wonders. Mainly it's looking at bat populations on the Scottish Islands. However, Dumfries and Galloway is observed to be one of the most species-rich or diverse areas in Scotland, owing somewhat to its relatively mild climate and also diversity of habitats. So there's an interest too for us to be surveying and monitoring bat species on the Scottish Solway. Bats also generally thought to be in decline for numerous reasons, most of which as a result of things like pollution or loss of habitat corridors through development. And so we're again planning to work with communities and volunteers to oversee population monitoring for these species, raising awareness through engagement activity as well. And I think this is the last one, but perhaps the most interesting one. With Bug Life as part of their Invertebrates on the Edge project, we're overseeing translocation of this species, the tadpole shrimp. It's really fascinating for a number of reasons, one of which it's the oldest extant animal in the world. I believe something like 220 million years old, so this thing was around long before the dinosaurs even, and has been more or less unchanged in all that time. So it's something of a living fossil. And it also exhibits a really fascinating life history strategy. Much like the natterjack toad, it too prefers to breed in ephemeral water, although it has a slightly different hydroperiod than that of the natterjack toad. But once it lays its eggs, those eggs can enter a sort of dormant state and remain in that state for as long, I think it's been recorded as long as 27 years, and be completely unaffected. They're also able to withstand extremes of temperature, salinity. It's thought that they can be ingested by other animals and excreted without any negative consequences. So really extreme species, and incredibly rare as well. In the UK, they're only known to occur at 2 sites, one of which is on the Scottish Solway, the other in the New Forest in Hampshire. So 2 sites that are quite distant from one another as well. In the Scottish Solway context, there are historical records of a colony on the Southwark estate, which many of you might know as modern-day RSPB Mersehead Reserve. That population is thought to have gone extinct in the middle of the last century as a result of sea level rise, and they were subsequently rediscovered on the Kerlaverick National Nature Reserve and Wildfowl and Wetland Trust Reserve in the last 20 years or so. That population too is thought to be at risk from subsequent sea level rise, so there's a plan, quite a timely plan, to harvest eggs from that site and to raise them in situ, and from that population breed a subsequent generation of eggs that will subsequently be used to inoculate ponds at the receptor site at RSP Beamer's Head. So currently, those individuals are being reared in captivity in a secret location somewhere close to the Scottish Solway. But yeah, really exciting part of the project. Big things to come from that, hopefully. And yeah, that is just a sort of whistle-stop tour of the project activity that we have planned as part of Species on the Edge on the Scottish Solway. We're currently in our first year of delivery of a 4-year programme, as I mentioned, so hopefully big things to come, and happy to sort of report on those as and when they develop. But thanks very much for your time.
Don't escape yet. Thank you very much, Liam. I'm slightly envious. What a fascinating glimpse, and some real high points for positivity there for us all. Anyone got a quick question for Liam before I let him escape?
How do you spot tadpole shrimp?
They're actually, so it didn't, should I repeat the question for the, so the question was, how do you spot a tadpole shrimp, was it? The picture didn't really do it justice, but a lot of people assume that they're a sort of microscopic organism, but in actual fact, adults can reach up to 9 centimeters in length, and they have quite long tail filaments, and so I think the measurement doesn't really include the tail filament either, so they are quite monstrous creatures when you think about it. And I've never actually seen one in person, certainly not in the wild, but if it were to be 9 centimeters, I think it would be fairly self-evident. But yeah, they do, and sort of, as I say, in ephemeral waters and ditches and puddles, sort of early autumn, late summer, if you guddle around enough, you might be lucky enough to see one.
Thank you, Liam.
Thank you.
A touch of the exotic. My great